Wednesday again. I'm here to continue our read aloud. I'm glad y'all could join us. I do hope your parents are checking the email because we're going to have a Zoom meeting tomorrow, Wednesday at 4 o'clock. So tell them to check it out and I'll get to see your faces and we can talk. Anyway, let's get to the story. So the key. I know where it is. Where? Right under my feet. It must have dropped through the floorboards when Dad opened them. There's nowhere else it could be. Patrick gazed at him in admiration, but also in dismay. How are we going to get it? He whispered. We'll have to take up the carpet first. Maybe Dad didn't nail all the boards down. Moving very quietly, they managed to lift one corner of Omry's bed and kick back the edge of the carpet from underneath. Another bit was under the bedside table leg, and that was tricky, but they shifted it between them in the end. Carefully, they folded the corner of the carpet back on itself, exposing the boards. Omry then stuck his fingers down the narrow crack on the ends of the boards, one after another, testing to see if they could be lifted. Only one of them could. The rest were nailed down to the joists underneath. Making as little noise as possible, he hadn't heard his parents go to bed yet. Omry pried up the short end of the board. A hole about 6 inches by 18 gaped in the light of the candle Patrick was holding. Even when he put the candle down the hole, they couldn't see much. We'll have to risk the bedside light, Omry said. They switched it on and carried it on its cord down to the hole. Kneeling on the floor, they peered into the depths. They could make out the dusty lath and plaster about a foot down, the top side of the ceiling of the room below, the room where Omry's parents were now sitting. We'll have to be dead quiet or they'll hear us. Dead quiet doing what? Asked Patrick. It's not there. You'd see it if it was. It must be under one of the nailed-down boards, said Omry despairingly. At that moment they heard Little Bear calling up, and they stood up. He was standing outside the longhouse, naked but for his breechcloth. His hair hung loose. His face and chest were smeared with ashes. His feet were bare. Little Bear, what are you doing? Asked Omry, aghast at his appearance. Want fire. Want make dance. Call spirits. Make Boone live. Omry looked at him for a moment and felt an ache in his throat that reminded him painfully of his babyish days when he used to cry all the time. Days he thought he'd left behind forever. Little Bear, dancing won't do any good. The spirits won't help. We need a doctor. And to get the doctor, we need the key. Would you help find it? Little Bear didn't move a muscle. I help. Gently, Omry picked him up. He knelt on the floor and put his hand down in the hole. Patrick held the light. Omry opened his hand and Little Bear stood on it, looking around in the dusty, dark tunnel stretching under the floor. I think it's somewhere down there, Omry said quietly, on the other side of that wooden wall. You'll have to find a way through, a hole or a crack of something. We'll give you all the light we can, but it's bound to be awfully dark on the other side. Do you think you can do it? I go, said Little Bear immediately. Right. Start looking for a way through. Little Bear, a tiny, vulnerable figure, strode off through the dust and darkness under the floor. Omry pulled the lampshade off the bedside lamp and thrust the bulb down into the hole. He couldn't get his head down in to watch, and Little Bear went out of sight almost at once. Is there a way through? He whispered in the tunnel. Yes, came Little Bear's voice. Big hole. I go through. Omry, give light. Omry pushed the light down as far as he could, but the base of the lamp made it stick. Can you see anything? He whispered as loudly as he dared. There was no answer. He and Patrick knelt for an age. There wasn't a sound, and then Patrick said suddenly, Did he take his bow and arrows? No, why? What if he meets the rat? Omry had totally forgotten about the rat in the excitement of realizing what had happened to the key, and now he felt a strange jerk in his chest, as if his heart had hiccuped. He bent his head down till his face was in the hole. He could smell the dust. The bright bulb was between him and the place where Little Bear had presumably gone through a hole in the joist and the next section of the underfloor. A hole. What could make a hole right through a joist? What else but a rat gnawing away all day? A rat at this moment out on the night prowl. A hungry rat who hadn't eaten for 24 hours. A pink-eyed, needle-toothed, omnivorous giant rat. Little Bear, Omry called frantically in the blackness. Come back, come back. Utter silence. Then he heard something. But it wasn't Little Bear's voice. It was the scuttering sound of a rodent's hard little hairless feet on lath and plaster. Little bear! Omry! It was a voice from the room below. What are you doing up there? It was his mother. Then quite distinctively he heard his father's voice. I can hear that blasted rat pattering overhead. It's probably keeping the boys awake. I'd better go up, said his mother. A door closed below and they heard her coming up the stairs. Even this dire prospect hardly had the power to do more than just push Omry's desperation one stage farther. He probably wouldn't have moved from his place on the floor if Patrick hadn't acted swiftly. Quick, light off, in the bed. He pulled Omry up, snatched the lamp out of his hand, switched it off. The candle was still down the hole. Patrick shoved the floorboard roughly back into position and moved the carpet so that it more or less covered the boards if you didn't look closely. Then he pushed Omry into his bed, covered him up. The footsteps were nearly at the door, and he had just flung himself down on the folding bed when the door opened. Omry lay there, his eyes squeezed shut, thinking, don't put on the light, don't put on the light. Light was coming into the room from the landing, but not enough to see much. His mother stood there for it seemed like 100 years. Finally, she whispered, Are you boys asleep? Needless to say, she got no reply. Omry? She tried once more, and then after 100 years, during which Omry imagined little bear bitten in half by the rat underneath where he was lying, the door finally closed again, leaving them in darkness. Wait, breathed Patrick. It was torture to wait. The rat had stopped moving when all the scuffling and footsteps had started. That was something, but now it was quiet again. Omry imagined it creeping toward its prey, its pink nose twitching, its albino whiskers trembling hungrily. Oh, how could he have let little bear go down there? Boone's death would have at least not been his fault, but if little bear was killed, Omry knew he would never forgive himself. At long last, the living room door closed and both boys stole out of bed again. Patrick reached the light from Omry, grabbed it, but Patrick insisted on looking first to see if Boone was still breathing. He was. They rolled back the carpet and lifted the board again, terrified that each movement would attract the grown-ups below. The homemade candle was burning away in the gloom, like a little torch in a disused mine, throwing its eerie light down the tunnel. Omry lay down flat. He didn't dare raise his voice, but he called softly, Little bear, are you there? Come back, you're in terrible danger. Silence. Oh God, why doesn't he come? Omry whispered frenziedly. At that moment they did hear something. It was hard to identify the sound. It was the rat, all right, but what was it doing? There was no running sound, just a sort of tiny shock, as if it had made one short, sudden movement. A pounce? Omry's heart was in his mouth. And then there were other sounds. If he had not gotten used to straining his ears to catch the voices of the little men, he might not have heard it. But he did hear it, and hope nearly lifted him off the ground. It was a faint, light scrambling sound, the sound of a small body getting through a hole in a hurry. Omry lifted the lamp back out of the hole and thrust his arm in, instead his hand open. Almost at once he felt little bear run into it. Omry closed his fingers as something warm and furry brushed against their backs. He snatched his hand out, grazing his knuckles against the splintery wood. There was something else in his hand, something cold and knobbly, twice as heavy as little bear. He opened his fingers and both boys leaned over to look. Sitting on Omry's palm, filthy and bedraggled but triumphant, was little bear, cradled in his arms, trailing cobwebs and a red satin ribbon. Was the missing key. You've done it, little bear. Good for you. Now quick, Omry, get the candle. Put the floor back. Let's find the Red Cross man. Reckless now, they switched the top light on. Patrick, being quiet as he could, replaced the floorboard in the carpet, while Omry looked through the fingers jumbled in the biscuit tin. Luckily, the army medical orderly was on top, still holding his precious doctor's bag. Little bear, meanwhile, stood beside the pallet bed, where Boone was lying, staring down at him, clutching the key in his arms. Omry took it from him, thrust the plastic man into the cupboard, turned the key, and he made himself count to 10 while Patrick watched, pop-eyed and scarcely breathing. And then he opened the door. And there is the picture. Ooh. There stood his old friend Tommy, his bag at his feet, rubbing his eyes and frowning around him. His face cleared as he saw Omry. Well, if it ain't you again. I don't half pick my moments to drop off to sleep, I must say. Thunder and great Minnie whining overhead. I thought I was a goner. What's a Minnie? Asked Patrick in a croaky voice. What, another of you? Asked Tommy, gaping. I must have eaten too much cheese for me dinner. Shouldn't give us cheese before a big attack. Very hard on the stomach, especially when it's churned up anyway. The nerves. What's a Minnie? It's our name for a Mittelwerfer. It's one of those big German shells. Make an horrible row, they do. Even before they land. A sort of whistle that gets louder and louder and then kerboom! Them blokes with my job has to pick themselves up, run as quick as like where it fell. If it fell in a trench, you better take care of the wounded. Well, we've got a wounded man here we want you to take care of, said Omry quickly. All right, I'm going to stop there, and we'll have to find out if the Dr. Tommy can take care of Boone and make him well again. I will see you next time. Have a good day. Bye.